All right, let's get right into it. We're diving into some fascinating stuff today, folks. Some real drama brewing in the MAGA world. And we, at the Daily News Podcast, have got this scoop.
Drama's putting it mildly. We're talking about serious discontent, even among some of Trump's most ardent supporters. You know, they're raising some big questions about how this whole return to office thing is actually playing out.
Yeah, and the thing is, this isn't just your typical political squabble. It goes way deeper than that.
Yeah.
We're seeing a fundamental clash between expectations and reality here.
Absolutely, a clash of visions, if you will. On the one hand, you've got this expectation of a triumphant comeback, a return to power, and all that jazz. And then you've got the reality of what Trump's been up to since leaving office.
Exactly, and that's where things start to get really interesting, because you know who's leading the charge in this whole critique.
Go on, tell me.
Well, none other than Michael Flynn. The guy you'd think would be front and center cheering for Trump 2.0 is actually suggesting they ditched the whole inauguration celebration. Can you believe it?
Wow, that's a bold move. Got to give him that. But why? What's his reasoning?
He's basically saying the country's got some serious problems that need fixing right here, right now. Like border security, the economy, you know, the whole 9 yards. He thinks those things should be the priority, not throwing big parties and celebrating.
Yeah, I see his point. It's like there's a time for celebration, and then there's a time for rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. Flynn seems to be in the latter camp.
For sure. And he doesn't hold back when it comes to Trump's, well, let's just say leisure activities, those frequent golf outings, the fancy shindigs at Mar-a-Lago, all that.
Ah, yes, the optics of it all.
Right. Flynn sees it as a distraction, a sign that Trump's more focused on enjoying himself than tackling these big national issues.
And that's got a sting coming from someone like Flynn, right? I mean, this isn't some political rival trying to score points. This is a close ally raising some serious red flags.
Precisely. It gives his criticism a whole lot more weight. And guess what? He's not alone in this.
Oh, really? Who else is jumping on this bandwagon?
Kathy Barnette, another big Trump supporter, she's also been pretty vocal about her concerns, calling it, and I quote here, a nonstop poolside party. Ouch. Right. She's also pushing for a more, action-oriented approach.
Action-oriented. That's an interesting choice of words. I wonder what that translates to in the context of the MAGA movement. What would that actually look like?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Maybe it means shifting away from the fiery rhetoric and focusing more on actual policy proposals,
Right. Less talk, more action.
Exactly. Or maybe it means being willing to compromise a bit, finding common ground to actually get things done. Who knows? Maybe it even hints at wanting a different kind of leadership style, one that's less about personality and more about substance.
Now that you mention it, the MAGA movement has always been incredibly loyal to Trump, almost defined by it, wouldn't you say? It's all about his unique ability to shake things up, challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is that now, even within this hardcore base, there's a growing feeling that something needs to change if they actually want to accomplish anything.
It's like they're realizing that being disruptive is one thing, but actually governing, actually making lasting change, that requires a different approach altogether.
You hit the nail on the head. It's like they're at this crossroads, and the path they choose now will have huge consequences, not just for the movement, but for the whole political landscape.
Yeah, it's like a fork in the road, and they're trying to figure out which direction to take.
Exactly. So what do you think? Are they going to stay true to the Trumpian playbook, or will they try something new? What do you think?
Well, that's a question we'll try to unpack in this deep dive. We're going to take a close look at the different perspectives within the MAGA movement, analyze the potential consequences of this growing divide, and explore what it all means for the upcoming elections. Buckle up, folks, because this is going to be a wild ride.
Oh, I'm ready. And for all of you listening, remember, this is your deep dive too. We want to hear your thoughts, your reactions, all of it. Jump into the comments, share this with your friends. Let's get this conversation going.
Yeah, let's do it. The more perspectives, the better. After all, this isn't just some abstract political debate. This is about the future of our country, and we all have a stake in it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, so where do we begin?
Well, I think the best place to start is by taking a closer look at Michael Flynn's critique. What exactly is he calling for, and what does it mean for the future of the MAGA movement?
Let's dive in.
Okay, so Flynn's argument essentially boils down to this. The MAGA movement needs to shift its focus from personality to policy. He believes that Trump's post-presidency antics are distracting from the real issues facing the country.
Right, and he specifically calls out those golf outings and Mar-a-Lago gatherings as examples of this misplaced focus. He argues that these activities project an image of a leader who's more concerned with personal pleasure than with serving the people.
And it's not just about optics, you know. Flynn genuinely believes that the country is facing a number of urgent challenges that require immediate attention. He lists things like border security, economic revitalization, and restoring America's standing on the world stage.
Yeah, he paints a pretty stark picture of a nation in crisis, a nation that needs a leader who's willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And he seems to be implying that Trump isn't that leader, at least not right now.
It's a pretty damning indictment, especially coming from someone who's been so close to Trump. Remember, Flynn was one of his earliest and most vocal supporters, a key figure in the 2016 campaign.
Exactly, which is why his criticism carries so much weight. This isn't some disgruntled outsider sniping from the sidelines. This is an insider, a confidant, saying that the emperor has no clothes.
And it's not just Flynn, right? We also have Kathy Barnette voicing similar concerns. She's been pretty outspoken about her disapproval of the non-stop poolside party atmosphere, calling for a return to a more focused and results-oriented approach.
Right, and her criticism resonates with a lot of people, especially those who feel that the MAGA movement has become too obsessed with personality and spectacle and not enough with substance. They're looking for concrete solutions to real problems, not just empty slogans and rallies.
Exactly. And that's where this disconnect between Trump's actions and the expectations of his base becomes so glaringly apparent. People are starting to ask, is he really fighting for us? Or is he just enjoying the perks of his celebrity status?
And that's a question that's going to be increasingly difficult for Trump to ignore as we move closer to the next election. He can't just rely on his charisma and his ability to fire up a crowd anymore. He needs to show that he's serious about addressing the concerns of everyday Americans, the people who put him in office in the first place.
Absolutely. And if he doesn't, well, there's a real danger that those people might start looking for someone else to champion their cause. Someone who they believe is more in touch with their struggles. Someone who they believe is actually willing to fight for them.
So the stakes are high for Trump and the MAGA movement. They're facing a choice: adapt or die. They can either embrace this call for a more pragmatic and policy-focused approach, or they can risk alienating their base and losing their grip on power.
And we, the Daily News Podcast, will be here every step of the way to cover this unfolding drama. We'll be talking to experts, analyzing the data, and bringing you the insights you need to make sense of it all.
So stay tuned, folks. This is just the beginning. Yeah, they're really going to have to make some tough decisions and quickly. It's a pivotal moment for them, that's for sure. What strikes you as most interesting in all of this?
Well, I have to say, it's the sheer audacity of Flynn's critique that really gets me. You know, this isn't just some random talking head. This is a guy who's been in the thick of it, right, in Trump's inner circle.
Yeah, I get it. He's not some lightweight critic.
Exactly. So for him to come out so publicly and call for such a drastic change, it's got to mean something, right?
Yeah.
It really speaks volumes about the level of concern within the MAGA movement itself.
I agree. It's not just about disagreeing on policy details or something. It suggests a deeper worry, like maybe they're losing sight of what they set out to do, that maybe Trump's personal choices are actually hurting their cause.
And remember, we got to hear this firsthand from Kathy Barnette when we had her on the Daily News Podcast. Yeah. She didn't sugarcoat anything when she talked about this whole lavish lifestyle thing and how it's just not connecting with everyday Americans.
Yeah, her words really hit home for a lot of people, especially those who feel like the movement has become too focused on personalities and not enough on actual solutions. You know, like healthcare costs, the economy, that feeling that the American dream is slipping away.
Right, exactly. And that's where this whole disconnect between what Trump's doing and what his supporters expect really comes into play. Holding rallies and energizing the base is one thing, but actually delivering on promises, that's a whole other ballgame.
It makes you wonder, what does success even look like for the MAGA movement at this point, now that they're out of power? Is it just about regaining power for its own sake? Is it about pushing a specific set of policies no matter what? Or is there something bigger, something more fundamental they're after?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I'm not sure there's a single answer. I think it depends who you ask within the movement. Some might say it's about putting America first. on trade, foreign policy, all of that.
Right, that national pride aspect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Others might say it's about protecting traditional values, pushing back against what they see as a cultural shift that's eroding American society.
And then there are those who are driven by economic anxieties, They feel like the system is rigged against them, that the American dream is out of reach. They see Trump as someone who gets their struggles, who's willing to fight for them, even if it means breaking the rules.
It's a really complex mix of motivations and beliefs, and that's what makes the MAGA movement so fascinating to study, but also so hard to pin down. It's not some monolithic block with a single purpose. It's a bunch of individuals with different backgrounds and viewpoints, all united by this shared sense of frustration and a desire for change.
And it's within that diversity, that we see the potential for both strength and weakness. If they can harness this energy, this passion, and channel it into a clear, compelling vision, they could become a real force in American politics.
But on the other hand, if these internal divisions get out of control, if they can't find a way to bridge the gap between those die-hard loyalists and those who want a more practical approach,
then they risk imploding, basically.
Yeah.
Wasting all their energy on infighting and losing any chance of achieving their goals.
It's a high-stakes game they're playing, that's for sure. The decisions they make now will have consequences not just for the movement itself, but for the whole Republican Party, and you could argue, for the direction of American politics as a whole.
It's like a political thriller playing out in real time, isn't it? We've got these competing factions, shifting alliances, all this tension bubbling under the surface that could erupt at any moment.
Absolutely, and for all of us trying to make sense of it, it's crucial to pay attention to the nuances, listen to the different voices, and realize that the MAGA phenomenon is way more complex than the media often makes it out to be.
It reminds me of this time...
Oh, hold on. Before we get sidetracked with anecdotes, let me jump in here. It's like, we're not just talking about abstract ideas. We're talking about real people's lives, their hopes, their fears, their anxieties about the future. And that's what makes this situation so important to understand.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we're trying to do here in this deep dive, right? We're peeling back the layers, looking at what's driving this movement, and exploring what the consequences might be of the choices they make.
Exactly. It's a journey of discovery. And we want you, our listeners, to be part of it. We want to hear your thoughts, your questions, your insights as we navigate this wild and ever-changing political landscape.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about the MAGA movement. It's about the future of our country, the values we hold dear, the kind of society we want to build for ourselves and for future generations.
Yeah, it's like the whole country's holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. You can really hear that urgency in Flynn's words, that frustration in Barnette's voice, and this sense of unease among everyday folks who feel like nobody's listening to them.
And that's what makes this whole thing so compelling. It's not just some political game, it's about real people, their hopes, their fears, their struggles. They're looking for someone to lead, to offer solutions, to actually fight for them.
It reminds me of something one Trump supporter told us. I think it was when we were at that rally for the Daily News podcast. He said, "We're tired of being ignored, tired of empty promises. We want action, not words." Really stuck with me.
Yeah, I can see why. That desire for real, tangible results, it seems to be a common thread across a lot of different groups, It's not just a left or right thing. It's this widespread feeling that the system is broken, that the people in charge are out of touch.
And that's where the MAGA movement really tapped into something, right? Love them or hate them, they've managed to grab the attention of millions of Americans who feel like their voices aren't being heard.
The question is, can they keep that momentum going? Can they turn that frustration into something more concrete, a political strategy that actually works? Or will they just get bogged down in infighting and lose sight of what they were trying to do in the first place?
It's the big unknown, isn't it? And I think a lot hinges on how they respond to these challenges from within, these calls for a more realistic and focused approach.
Right. If they can figure out a way to bridge that gap, between the hardcore loyalists and those who are saying, hey, maybe we need to adjust course a bit, they might actually be able to turn this energy into real change.
But if they keep going down this road of division and arguing amongst themselves, they risk pushing away potential allies and just wasting all that political capital they've built up.
And that's a gamble they can't afford to take if they want to stay relevant in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is a constantly shifting landscape, right? They're going to have to adapt and evolve if they want to keep up.
Like a game of chess, got to be thinking several moves ahead, anticipating what the other side's going to do, and be ready to change your strategy on the fly.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to be keeping an eye on, in the coming months and years. How will the MAGA movement respond to all this pressure? Will they stick to their guns or try something new?
And what about the Republicans as a whole? Will they embrace this MAGA energy or try to distance themselves from the more controversial aspects of it?
So many questions, and the answers are going to shape American politics for years to come. But one thing's for sure, we'll be here to help you make sense of it all, every step of the way.
We'll keep diving deep, exploring the complexities, and giving you the insights you need to navigate this crazy world.
So stay tuned, folks, because this story is far from over. It's just getting started.
And that's a wrap for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Hey everyone, it's the Daily News Podcast, and we are back with a new deep dive for you all. Today, we're going to be looking at U.S. politics, specifically the Republican Party. It's pretty interesting right now. A lot going on and a lot at stake. So to set the scene, imagine like late night meetings, the kind of pressure cooker atmosphere of a big vote, and the whole future of the party hanging in the balance. The main player in all this is Mike Johnson. He's the current Speaker of the House. They call him MAGA Mike. But get this, the MAGA wing of the party is actually revolting against him. It's like if the student body president got challenged by the very group that got him elected.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's not just a few people disagreeing with him either. It's major figures like Steve Bannon, the guy who practically built the MAGA platform. He's openly criticizing Johnson's leadership. And then you've got people like Thomas Massie. He's a congressman, a pretty conservative guy. He's publicly said he won't vote for Johnson.
Oh yeah, I read Massie's statement. It was pretty shocking. He didn't hold back at all. And then there's Lauren Boebert. She's willing to negotiate, but only if Johnson agrees to appoint Chip Roy as chair of the Rules Committee.
Yeah, that's a big one. That throws a wrench in things.
Big time.
The Rules Committee basically decides what even gets voted on. So if you put someone like Roy in charge, he's known for being uncompromising. That would be a deal breaker for a lot of moderate Republicans.
It sounds like a high-stakes poker game.
Yes.
Everyone's bluffing.
Yeah.
Trying to outmaneuver each other. And to make things even more interesting, you've got Donald Trump and Elon Musk publicly supporting Johnson.
Right, and that might be backfiring. I've been following all the discussions online. There are a lot of MAGA supporters who are really skeptical of Musk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they see him as an outsider.
That makes sense.
And they don't trust that he really shares their values.
So they're kind of like, thanks, but no thanks to Musk's help.
Pretty much. They're worried he might be trying to change the party.
Which just adds to the tension.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to remember that the Republicans only have a very small majority in the House.
Right, it's really fragile.
Super fragile, like a house of cards. Even 1 or 2 votes against Johnson could be enough to remove him as Speaker.
And if that happens?
Well, things could get very messy.
So walk me through this. What are the possible consequences if Johnson loses? What does it mean for the Republicans and for the government as a whole?
The fallout could be huge. Imagine crucial things getting delayed, like the certification of electoral votes.
Oh, wow.
That's the kind of delay that could shock the entire political system.
So this isn't just some internal party fight. It could actually affect how the whole government works.
Oh, absolutely. It's much bigger than just one man's career.
It's like watching a political thriller.
Definitely.
But with real consequences for everyone.
Yeah.
That's scary.
It is.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
It's a real mess, and it's happening at the worst possible time. Like you said, if the Republicans are too busy fighting with each other, even something as important as certifying the electoral votes could be delayed. And that's not good for anyone.
Speaking of messy threat, we should talk more about Elon Musk. You mentioned that some MAGA supporters aren't happy with him supporting Johnson. Why is that? What's making them suspicious?
It is pretty weird, isn't it? You have this billionaire tech CEO suddenly getting involved in politics, and it's causing all kinds of problems. Some MAGA people think that he's trying to take over their movement, or at least water down their agenda.
I can see why they'd be worried. Musk's political views have always been kind of all over the place. He's not exactly known for following the rules.
Yeah.
And he loves to shake things up.
Exactly. He's a disruptor, and that makes a lot of people nervous. Especially the people who are used to being in charge. They're used to calling the shots, and now they have this unpredictable force to deal with.
And this is all happening against the backdrop of a very divided America. We have this huge polarization between the two parties, and it feels like it's getting harder and harder to find any common ground.
It's like we're living in two different worlds. each with its own set of facts and beliefs. And social media just makes it worse. It creates echo chambers so people only hear what they already agree with.
It's like trying to have a conversation across a giant canyon.
Yeah.
You're shouting at each other, but no one's actually listening. And all that lack of communication and understanding just makes things worse.
You're totally right. We need to find a way to break out of those echo chambers and actually have real dialogue. It's not about agreeing on everything. It's about respecting each other's views and being willing to listen.
Okay, so let's bring it back to this power struggle. Let's say Johnson does manage to win this vote. What does that mean for his relationship with the MAGA wing? Will they just forgive and forget?
I doubt it. Even if he wins, it'll be a painful victory. His authority will be really damaged, and he'll always be worried that someone is trying to get rid of him.
So it's like surviving an assassination attempt but being left with a permanent injury. He'll always be trying to keep the people who tried to get rid of him happy.
That's a good way to put it. He'll have to make compromises, and that could alienate the moderate Republicans. It's a very delicate balancing act.
Okay, so let's imagine the opposite happens. What if Johnson doesn't survive this vote? What's the backup plan for the Republicans? Who takes over?
That's the big question. There are a few people who could take his place, but no one has the same level of support that he does. It could turn into a real free-for-all, with different groups fighting for control.
So there's a real chance of a power vacuum,
Yeah,
which would just make things even more unstable.
exactly. And with so many important decisions to be made, including those electoral votes we talked about, this kind of leadership crisis could have a huge impact on the whole country.
It's like a car driving down a mountain with no one behind the wheel.
That's a great analogy.
The longer it takes to get control back, the more likely it is that everyone's going to crash.
And everyone's in that car. The American people. They're the ones who suffer if the politicians can't figure things out.
So we've got potential delays in getting things done, a party falling apart, and a country that's on edge. That's not a good combination. But is there any hope? Is there a way out of this mess?
There's always hope. But we need a major change in how we do politics. We need to move away from this idea that it's all about winning and start working together.
So we need to bridge the divide, have those difficult conversations,
Yeah.
and find common ground.
Exactly. It's not about giving up your beliefs. It's about understanding that you can disagree with someone without hating them. We need to learn how to have civil discussions again and find ways to work together for the good of everyone.
It's easy to get cynical about politics, especially when everything seems so broken. But you're right, there has to be hope. There has to be a way to move forward.
And it starts with each of us. We need to hold our leaders accountable, demand better from them, and get involved in the political process in a positive way. We can't just sit back and complain. We need to be active in creating the future we want.
That's a great message. But we're not out of the woods yet. This fight within the Republican Party is still going on, and we don't know how it's going to end. So let's recap what we know.
Okay, so we have Speaker Mike Johnson, also known as Maggie Mike. He's facing a serious challenge from his own party, the MAGA. It's a battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. And it's all about deep disagreements on what they believe.
It's not just some internal fight. It could disrupt important political processes
Yeah.
and affect how the whole U.S. government works.
Right, and we can't forget about Elon Musk. His involvement has made things even more complicated and more uncertain.
It's a real-life political drama,
It really is.
and the stakes couldn't be higher.
No, they couldn't.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at some kind of turning point here, not just for the Republicans, but for the whole country. So what does all this tell us about what U.S. politics will look like in the future?
Well, I think it's kind of a mini version of what's happening all over the country. These big disagreements about what we believe, we're seeing it everywhere. From school board meetings to Congress, it's like we've forgotten how to disagree with each other without getting nasty.
Right, and social media just makes it so much worse. It's so easy to just get swept up in the anger and end up in these echo chambers.
Yeah.
You only hear from people who think the same way you do.
Yeah, the algorithms are designed to keep you hooked, and nothing keeps people hooked like a fight. So you end up surrounded by people who agree with you. And anyone who doesn't is instantly an enemy.
Right.
It's toxic.
So how do we escape from this? How do we start having these difficult conversations without everyone just yelling and calling each other names?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we actually have a lot in common. I think more than we realize. We all want the same things. We want a good future for ourselves and our kids. We want to feel safe. We may have different ideas about how to get there, but that common goal should be what we start with.
It's like remembering we're all on the same team, even if we're wearing different jerseys.
Exactly.
We might not agree on the best strategy, but we all want to win the game.
Exactly. And that means being willing to listen to each other, actually hearing what the other person is saying, even if you don't like it. It means going into those conversations wanting to understand, not just wanting to win.
I know. It sounds so easy, but it's so hard to actually do. We're so quick to judge, to just write off anyone who sees things differently.
Yeah, it's a learned behavior, and the media and the algorithms just keep reinforcing it. But we can unlearn it. We can choose to be more thoughtful, more respectful, even when we're talking to people we disagree with.
It's like rewiring our brains so that we see the human being in everyone, no matter how different they seem.
And that's what I want you to think about. How can you build bridges in your own life? How can you help make political conversations better?
It's a challenge for all of us, and our democracy might depend on it. This has been the Daily News Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful. Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at something that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. We're going to be talking about how certain immigration policies impacted the shipbuilding industry, specifically down in Louisiana. Now, you might be thinking, what do shipyards and immigration have to do with each other? But trust me, this is where things get interesting.
Well, you see, what we're really dealing with here is a bit of a paradox. Shipyards, particularly those in Louisiana, have historically been huge supporters of the GOP, and their executives have actually donated significant sums to Republican campaigns.
Exactly. And, it's those very policies that have led to a labor shortage in the industry. It's kind of like a classic case of be careful what you wish for, wouldn't you say?
Precisely. The Trump administration's efforts to reduce undocumented labor while stemming from, certain political ideologies have inadvertently hurt industries that rely heavily on skilled workers.
Yeah.
Regardless of their immigration status.
So we have this push for increased military ship production happening at the same time as the workforce is shrinking. I was reading through some of these sources, and it just seems like a recipe for disaster.
It certainly created a complex situation.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this a bit. Louisiana is an absolutely crucial hub for shipbuilding in the U.S., and its shipyards have long played a vital role in our nation's defense and maritime industries.
Right, and those shipyards have always been associated with a particular political leaning, as you mentioned. Their support for Republican candidates and policies has been pretty consistent over the years.
Absolutely, and that alignment with GOP policies is key to understanding the predicament they found themselves in. When the Trump administration implemented stricter immigration enforcement measures, including deportations, it created this ripple effect throughout the shipbuilding industry.
And it wasn't just about the number of workers. These deportations targeted skilled laborers who had been contributing to the industry for years. Welders, pipe fitters, painters, the people who kept those massive operations running smoothly. These aren't entry-level positions we're talking about here.
Exactly. These roles often require specialized training certifications and years of on-the-job experience. It's not as simple as just finding warm bodies to fill the gaps.
So these shipyards, which had traditionally relied on a workforce that included both documented and undocumented individuals, were suddenly faced with a critical shortage of experienced personnel.
And remember, this was happening while the Trump administration was simultaneously pushing for a significant increase in military ship production. To bolster our naval capabilities, it put the shipyards in a very difficult position.
Okay, so we've got a perfect storm brewing here. Increased demand for ships, a shrinking workforce, and specialized skills that are not easily replaced. So what happened next? Did the shipyards just grind to a halt?
Not exactly. There were attempts to address the labor shortage. The Navy, recognizing the urgency of the situation, invested heavily in modernizing the shipbuilding industry. They poured billions of dollars into initiatives aimed at attracting new talent and upgrading facilities.
I was reading about those efforts, state-of-the-art training programs, apprenticeship initiatives. They even had catchy advertising campaigns to recruit new workers.
Right.
"We build giants" was one of the slogans, right?
Yes, they pulled out all the stops to try and revitalize the workforce. But as you might have guessed, it wasn't a quick fix. Attracting and training new workers takes time, especially for those highly specialized roles.
And the deportations had already depleted the pool of experienced workers, making the situation even more challenging.
Precisely. The influx of new workers simply couldn't keep pace with the growing demand and the loss of skilled labor due to those deportations. The shipyards were still facing a significant shortfall.
So it seems like a classic case of unintended consequences. Policies aimed at curbing undocumented labor ended up hurting industries that were vital to national security and economic growth. But this wasn't just about undocumented workers, was it? The Trump administration's stance on immigration was much broader.
That's an important point. The administration also proposed limitations on legal immigration pathways, including asylum and temporary protected status programs.
Hold on, for those of us who aren't immigration policy experts, can you explain what temporary protected status means?
Of course, temporary protected status, or TPS, is a program that allows individuals from certain countries experiencing conflict or natural disasters to live and work in the U.S. temporarily.
So these are people who are legally present in the country, but their status is dependent on the conditions in their home countries.
Exactly. And by proposing restrictions on TPS, the administration was essentially limiting another avenue for individuals to contribute to the U.S. workforce legally.
And that had implications beyond the shipbuilding industry, didn't it?
Absolutely. Other sectors that relied heavily on immigrant labor, like agriculture, hospitality, and construction, also felt the impact of these broader immigration policy shifts.
It seems like we're starting to see a pattern here. A tightening of immigration policies, both for undocumented and documented individuals, leading to labor shortages in industries that are crucial to the U.S. economy.
Precisely. And this is where the story gets even more complicated. Amidst this growing crisis, there was a glimmer of hope, a bipartisan immigration deal.
A bipartisan immigration deal in this political climate. That sounds almost too good to be true.
It seemed promising, I'll give you that. This deal, spearheaded by both Democrats and a group of conservative Republicans, aimed to find a solution to the labor shortage while offering some stability for migrant workers.
So what did this magical deal entail? What were they proposing?
The core idea was to create a pathway for undocumented immigrants already working in the U.S. to gain legal status. They wouldn't have to live under the constant threat of deportation, allowing them to contribute more openly and securely.
That sounds like it could have addressed the labor shortage head-on, while also providing a more humane approach to immigration. Seems like a win-win, right? So why didn't it go through?
Well, despite the bipartisan support, the deal ultimately faced too many political roadblocks and was rejected. It's a reminder that even when common ground seems within reach, the political realities can be quite complicated.
It's a shame it fell apart. Seemed like a genuine opportunity to address the labor shortage while offering a more secure future for those who had already been contributing to the economy. But I guess that's politics for you. So with the bipartisan deal off the table, what happened next? Did the shipyards just resign themselves to this labor shortage?
Not quite. While the deal's failure was a setback, it also brought the issue into sharper focus. We started to hear more from those directly impacted by the labor shortage, particularly shipyard executives who were feeling the pressure.
And what were they saying?
Their message was clear. They needed workers, and the current immigration policies were making it incredibly difficult to find and retain them.
Do you have any specific examples?
Absolutely. One shipyard executive from Washington State described it as a constant scramble to find skilled welders and pipe fitters. He said they were losing contracts because they couldn't staff projects adequately.
That sounds rough. Any other examples?
Yes, another executive, this time from Massachusetts, pointed directly to the broken immigration system as the main obstacle to keeping his workforce stable. He had experienced employees who were afraid to come to work, worried that they might be targeted for deportation despite being in the country legally.
It's heartbreaking to think about the human cost of these policies. We're not just talking about abstract economic indicators here. We talk about real people's lives and livelihoods being affected.
Exactly. These personal accounts highlighted the very real consequences of the labor shortage, not just for the shipyards themselves, but for the workers, their families, and the communities that relied on these industries.
It sounds like the impact went far beyond the shipyards themselves.
Absolutely. The ripple effects were widespread. Local economies that depended on shipbuilding suffered. National agendas like bolstering our military readiness and investing in critical infrastructure were also hampered by the lack of skilled labor.
So this wasn't just an isolated issue affecting a single industry. It was a systemic problem with far-reaching consequences.
Precisely. And it brought into sharp relief the interconnectedness of immigration policy, labor market dynamics, and economic priorities. These things are all intertwined, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be pretty significant.
Okay, so we've talked about the labor shortage, the failed bipartisan deal, and the impact on the shipyards and the broader economy. But there's another piece of the puzzle we haven't touched on yet, the H-1B visa program.
Ah, yes. The H-1B visa program. It's often associated with the tech industry, but its impact extends to other sectors, including shipbuilding.
Now, for our listeners who may not be familiar with the ins and outs of visa programs, can you give us a quick rundown of what the H-1B program is all about?
Of course. The H-1B visa program allows U.S. companies to hire foreign workers in specialty occupations that require highly specialized knowledge and skills.
So in the context of shipbuilding, this would be for those skilled welders, pipe fitters, and other specialized roles we've been discussing?
Exactly. And while the program can be a valuable tool for filling critical skill gaps, it's not without its controversies.
What kind of controversies are we talking about?
Well, there are concerns about the potential for exploitation of foreign workers under the program. There have been cases where companies have abused the system, paying H-1B workers lower wages than their American counterparts, or forcing them to work in subpar conditions.
That's awful. So it seems like there's a need for greater oversight and regulation to ensure that the program is used ethically and doesn't come at the expense of worker rights.
Absolutely. And there's also the argument that the H-1B program can displace American workers. Critics argue that companies are using the program to bring in cheaper foreign labor rather than investing in training and developing a domestic workforce.
I can see how that would be a concern. It's a complex issue with valid points on both sides. But in the context of the shipbuilding labor shortage, it seems like the H-1B program could offer at least a partial solution.
It could, but it's not a simple fix. The shipbuilding industry faces unique challenges when it comes to utilizing the H-1B program.
What kind of challenges?
For one, the application process for H-1B visas can be lengthy and expensive, making it a less attractive option for some shipyards, especially smaller ones.
That makes sense. And what about the argument that it displaces American workers? Is that a valid concern in the shipbuilding industry?
It's a complex issue. While some argue that the program could lead to American workers being passed over for jobs, others contend that the shortage of skilled labor in the industry is so severe that there simply aren't enough qualified Americans to fill those roles.
So it's a balancing act, trying to address the immediate need for skilled workers, while also ensuring that the program doesn't negatively impact American workers in the long run.
Exactly, and this is where the need for a nuanced and comprehensive approach to immigration policy becomes even more apparent.
Yeah, it seems like there's no easy solution here. We've got competing interests, political roadblocks, and a labor shortage that's impacting not just the shipbuilding industry, but the broader economy as well.
It's definitely a multifaceted issue. And, this specific case focusing on the shipbuilding industry offers a really interesting lens through which to view these larger challenges. It demonstrates how seemingly isolated policy decisions can have this ripple effect across various industries and communities.
Putting this deep dive together has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's made me realize that immigration policy isn't just some abstract political debate. It has real-world consequences that affect businesses, workers, families, and even our national security.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this exploration, I think it leaves us with some pretty crucial questions to ponder. If this labor shortage persists, how will it affect our ability to meet the growing demand for new ships, especially those needed for national defense? What about other critical infrastructure projects that rely on these skilled workers?
Those are some pretty heavy questions, and it seems like there's no easy answer.
There isn't. It's a complex issue that requires careful consideration and a really nuanced approach. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we need to start thinking about the long-term implications of our choices, not just the immediate political gains or losses.
Well said. I hope our listeners have gained a better understanding of this complex web of factors contributing to the shipbuilding labor shortage. It's a story about unintended consequences, political gridlock, and the very real human impact of policy decisions.
And we encourage all of you to keep exploring these issues, consider the perspectives of everyone involved, and engage in thoughtful discussions about how we can create a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. All right, so today we're gonna take a deep dive into this new strategy that the Democrats are trying out.
Okay.
And it's pretty fascinating how they're trying to hold former President Trump accountable for all these unfulfilled campaign promises. But specifically, those promises that were aimed at American workers.
Right.
So they're basically turning those old pledges into new legislation.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really clever.
Yeah, I mean, that could put Republicans in a tough spot.
Definitely. And the thing is,
Yeah.
they're focusing on stuff that's very relatable.
Right.
It's not just abstract policy debates. It's like everyday life issues.
Exactly. Things that people experience in their daily lives.
Yeah, like, for example, one of the promises they're focusing on is eliminating taxes on tips.
Oh, wow.
And, think about how many people rely on tips as a significant part of their income.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tangible issue that resonates with a large segment of the workforce.
For sure. And then there's that proposal to cap credit card interest rates at 10%.
Here.
Credit card debt is a major burden for so many Americans. So that kind of policy could provide some real relief.
Yeah, and then we can't forget about the fear of automation.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
And its impact on jobs.
Especially union jobs.
Exactly. And that's something that's been growing for years. And the Democrats are addressing it head on with this new legislation.
It's smart because by putting those bills forth, they're essentially forcing Republicans to make a choice.
Right.
Either they support these policies that could benefit a large number of working class Americans.
Many of whom are part of Trump's base.
Exactly. Or they oppose them and risk alienating those voters.
Yeah. So it's a strategic maneuver.
Very much so.
And one of the key battlegrounds where this is playing out is the H-1B visa program.
Okay.
And this program allows companies to hire foreign workers for specialty occupations.
Right.
And it's been a source of debate for years.
Yeah. I mean, the core argument is whether this program genuinely addresses a shortage of skilled workers in the U.S.
Right.
Or if it's just a way for companies to hire cheaper labor and potentially displace American workers.
Yeah, there are valid points on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex issue.
Yeah, and the Democrats are really framing this as a billionaires versus workers issue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in fact, one of our sources directly states that the program benefits billionaires while hurting American workers.
That's a powerful narrative.
Yeah, and it really taps into that sentiment of economic inequality.
For sure.
And the Democrats are basically positioning themselves as the champions of the working class, fighting against a system that favors the wealthy and powerful.
Right.
So what kind of reforms are they actually proposing?
Well, one of the key proposals is to raise the minimum wage thresholds for guest workers.
Okay.
So that would make it less financially attractive for companies to hire them over American workers. And another proposal is focused on giving guest workers more flexibility to switch jobs.
Okay.
So that could reduce their dependence on a single employer and give them more negotiating power.
So it seems like they're trying to strike a balance.
Yeah.
Address the concerns about job displacement for American workers, but also ensure fair treatment for the foreign workers that are already here.
Exactly. Trying to create a system that benefits both while holding companies accountable.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, it is.
And this kind of leads us to another interesting point.
Okay.
The role of Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah.
In this whole debate. And, his recent statement about American workers lacking the necessary skills has become a focal point for the Democrats.
Especially when you consider that companies like Tesla, which Musk leads, have been laying off American workers while also advocating for the H-1B visa program. It seems hypocritical, and the Democrats are capitalizing on that.
Totally. It feeds into that narrative of corporate greed, companies putting profits over people.
Right.
And that resonates with people who feel like the system is rigged against them.
Absolutely. And it's not just about attacking Musk or Tesla.
Right.
It's about highlighting a broader trend that the Democrats are trying to address with this strategy.
So this isn't just about going after Trump.
Right. It's bigger than.
It's about presenting a different vision for the American economy.
Yeah.
So are we seeing a return to economic populism?
Potentially.
For the Democrats?
Yeah.
A genuine shift towards policies that prioritize workers?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is this a real ideological shift or just a clever tactic to win back voters?
Yeah. It's too early to say for sure, but the potential implications are huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if this is a genuine move towards economic populism, it could really reshape the political landscape.
It's a big if, though, right?
Yeah.
And it brings us to the big question. Can this strategy actually work?
Yeah. Will it resonate with voters beyond just, the the Democratic base.
Right, and I think that's the real challenge for them.
Yeah.
They have to convince voters that they're not just offering empty promises.
Yeah, or just, attacking the opposition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need to actually show that they have a plan to fix these problems.
Right. It's one thing to point out problems. It's another to offer real solutions.
Totally. Voters are going to want to see concrete results,
Yeah.
not just talk.
Exactly. They need to turn these proposals into tangible benefits for people.
If they want to keep this momentum going. And they also need to stay focused, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to get sidetracked with all the drama of politics, but they need to keep their eye on the ball.
Stay on message.
Yeah, and consistently champion these economic issues.
Otherwise, it's going to look opportunistic.
Right. Like, they're not sincere.
Voters can see right through that.
Yeah, and we can't forget about all the legislative hurdles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even if these proposals are popular, getting them passed in a divided Congress is going to be tough.
Yeah, they're going to have to build coalitions and compromise and just navigate that whole legislative process.
And a long game.
For sure.
And it won't be easy.
But the potential rewards are huge.
Yeah.
If they can pull this off, it could really shift the political landscape in their favor.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I've been thinking about,
Yeah.
it's not just about winning elections.
Yeah.
This strategy could actually reshape the whole political discourse.
I think you're right. They're tapping into this deep well of anxiety and frustration.
That's everywhere.
Yeah, that exists across party lines.
Yeah, so many Americans feel like the system is rigged against them,
Right.
and they're looking for someone to fight for them.
Yeah, it's a sentiment that goes beyond, just Democrats or Republicans.
Exactly. The concerns about job security and wages and cost of living.
It affects everyone.
People of all political persuasions are feeling this.
So by addressing these concerns head on, the Democrats are trying to create a broader coalition.
That goes beyond their traditional base,
Exactly. They want to become the party of the working class.
regardless of party affiliation.
It's a bold move.
It is.
We'll see if it works.
It's definitely a strategy worth watching.
Now, another interesting thing about this strategy is how they're reframing the debate around immigration.
Yeah.
By focusing on the potential exploitation of immigrant workers through programs like the H-1B visa,
Yeah.
they're kind of shifting the conversation away from that typical us versus them narrative.
Right. So instead of pitting American workers against immigrant workers,
Exactly.
they're emphasizing the shared interests of both groups.
They're arguing that both American and immigrant workers are being exploited by a system that prioritizes corporate profits over worker well-being.
Yeah. And that's a message that a lot of people can relate to, regardless of their stance on immigration.
It highlights the need for a more equitable system.
For all workers.
Exactly, regardless of where they were born.
And it really challenges those traditional arguments that
Right.
are used to justify restrictive immigration policies.
By focusing on the economic realities,
Yeah.
they're forcing a conversation about how to create a system that works for everyone.
This feels like a big shift.
Yeah.
It's not just about politics anymore.
It's about real issues.
Yeah, issues that impact the lives of millions of Americans.
And that brings us to maybe the most important question.
Okay.
What does all this mean for you, the listener?
Right. Why should anyone listening care about this new strategy from the Democrats?
Because it could have a real impact on your life, your job, your community.
Yeah.
I mean, if the Democrats are successful with this agenda, we could see big changes in things like wages, healthcare, education, job security.
This isn't just political talk.
No, it's real life stuff.
This affects your pocketbook, your opportunities, your future.
You need to pay attention, stay informed, and make your voice heard.
This is a moment where things could change.
Yeah.
And we all need to be part of the conversation.
Speak up and demand that our leaders actually prioritize the needs of working Americans.
This has been a fascinating deep dive
It has.
into the Democrats' new strategy.
Yeah.
They're really shaking things up.
Starting to reshape the political landscape.
And as we move forward,
Yeah.
it's important to remember that this is an evolving story.
Absolutely. The political landscape is always changing.
Yeah, new challenges and opportunities will come up.
Yeah.
But one thing's clear, like this focus on economic populism and holding people accountable for their promises, it's something we got to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about watching. It's about engaging with the ideas, thinking about them.
Yeah.
What could happen, and making your voice heard.
So as we wrap this up,
Yeah.
what's the big thing you want listeners to take away?
I think the big takeaway is we're at a really important moment
Okay.
in American politics right now. that Democrats are trying to shift things, trying to change the whole conversation, trying to reconnect with working class voters.
Yeah.
Whether they can do it, I don't know. We'll see. But the effects of this strategy could be huge.
Yeah. It's a really bold move.
It is.
And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah.
How are Republicans going to respond? Is this actually going to lead to real benefits for workers?
Right.
These are questions we're going to keep looking at.
Absolutely.
As the story develops.
Yeah. And in the meantime, everyone listening, stay engaged, stay informed, and keep asking the tough questions. The future of politics is happening right now.
Right.
And we all have to be part of it.
Well, this has been a really fascinating look
It has.
at this new strategy from the Democrats.
For sure.
And we're going to keep following this story.
Yeah.
And we'll be back soon with more analysis and insights.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.